I've long wanted to know how you got into this, though. How you got into this journey, basically, without leaving the space open too wide. But
well, that's a big question.
It is a big question.
But let me see if I can just give you some markers, because they're quite important for me. When I was 13, 14, which is quite a while ago now, 13, 14, I was part of a Church of England youth club. And a lot of my friends, colleagues, they were going to what was then a sort of revivalist movement that was run by a man called Billy Graham. As this tells you how long ago it was.
He was an American, wasn't he, Billy Graham? Yeah.
And he used to run these huge events. And I didn't want to go. And I said, I'm not going to do that. And then one day, I also sang in the choir. And one day, I had an experience, which it was as though the top of my head was being blown off at this 13-year-old. And we had a church warden who was a very kind person. He was an older man, he was in his 50s, 60s. And I said, look, something's going on, I need to. And he said, can we go to the vestry? Can we sit down? Can we just pray together? So I said, that's fine. And so we sat there in silence, and this thing is just, my head is going. But it's not my head, not my intellect. I was having another experience. And he said, something's going on, can you tell me about it? And I did. So he said, okay, let's just, in silence, because what's happening is really important. He said, you're having some form of awakening. So I thought, and he took it seriously. And for the next few years, I did some work around the club, and I was proselytizing the stuff, and then closed down totally when I was about 17, 18, went to university and all. Anyway, so I'm going to keep the story a bit shorter. I then had an experience. I went to a course when I was 28, 29, that was about self-hypnosis. It was 4 days, and it was quite extraordinary. And 4 times a day, you went through this process. And in that process, over 4 days, I reconnected to this 13, 14-year-old spiritual experience. And it was taken seriously. And from then, I realized I'd better do something. I left my job. It was very dramatic. I left my job. I found Psychosynthesis. And and I remember buying the hard copy of Assagioli's book in foils. It was the last copy. And I went to a friend of mine and said, look, something's going on here. And I went to see Bill Robertson, who'd started the Psychosynthesis in Education Trust lecture series in 1968. This was in 73. And I said to Bill, I really want to try and study this book. It feels like I'm coming home.
And this was like the book Psychosynthesis?
Exactly, the manual. Hardback, I've still got it. And so he said, you won't believe this. He said, this morning I got a brochure from the Psychosynthesis Institute in San Francisco, and they are offering a month-long training program. So I said, when? He said, next week. So I went.
It's always the way.
No, I know, it was amazing.
Synchronicity.
No time to think or procrastinate.
So I said, I went home and called them that day and booked to go on this month-long. And it just totally transformed how I saw the world. I then spoke to the guy who had set up the Psychosynthesis Research Foundation with Roberto in New York, and he said, you've got to go and meet Roberto. Because I'd said at the end of this course, I want to do something in the UK, together with Joan, who had been part of that. So he said, go and see Roberto. So we went to see Roberto, and we said, we studied with him for about a year before he died. And we said we want to create something. And he was amazing.
What was his energy like? That's what
Roberto's?
Yeah, Roberto Assagioli, yeah.
imagine this he was quite frail then, but he wasn't sick. He had the most amazing presence. That sounds like any devotee. I don't mean it quite that way. The presence was wisdom for me. And he was tone deaf. He couldn't hear anything by that time, so we used to write little questions on paper, and he'd read them and we'd talk. But his energy was, he laughed a lot, he giggled, he laughed, but his context was, there's a way of seeing the world which is very distinct from how the intellect sees the world. And you ask him questions around that, or you take problems to him and ask him to help you solve this problem. Anyway, there are lots of stories around that. And he would do things like, he'd get to turn around and look at this picture of the cosmos and say, is your problem really that significant now? And he wasn't avoiding anything, but he was saying, recontextualize how you're holding what you're talking about, and what the problem is.
It sounds like these identifications.
Well, that's my point. That's exactly what he was doing. And as you know, given that we've worked together, for me, the practice, the psychosynthesis practice, for me, is absolutely core, is the disidentification practice. And to use that as a practice, a daily practice, it certainly transformed my life.
Yeah, it transformed mine, yeah.
Did it? Because in that, it's all there, isn't it? It's like, it's not just I have a body and I'm not my body. I have feelings, I'm not my feelings. I have a mind and I'm not my mind. But also, it acknowledges that I'm a self. And I have will. And therefore, I can make my life different. So, very powerful.
Also, I just want to ask, is it the case that I know you didn't do therapy with him, but do you think he would have been a good therapist? Did you feel like almost like held in his presence? Because some people are very theoretical, but they're not good therapists.
He wasn't theoretical. He would do stupid. He would do crazy things, right? Because that was his way of breaking set, And by crazy things, he would experiment with his clients. Experiment in the sense of getting them to act as if. He would use every opportunity to help this person disidentify. Now, the other piece that you probably heard from me a lot is that I think our training is particularly focused on people who are healthy neurotics, who have some sense of ego strength. It doesn't have to be huge, but there's enough, because I think that's where psychosynthesis really adds hugely. And he saw that. It's very clear. And he would evoke the I, he'd evoke the individual through the disidentification. I don't think he was a group worker. And that sounds very judgmental, but I just don't. But because that isn't what he did. He would come into a room with a group, and by his presence, things would happen. But it wasn't interactive, interpersonally.
And then it depends on the ego strength of other people as well, and the openness to connect with that subtle energy, perhaps.
But you see, I think that's the point.
It doesn't have to be loud or
not at all. But I think he could sense seriously whether there was ego strength and whether there was enough I-ness, identity, to work with, rather than doing just repair on dysfunctional personalities and helping building ego. That wasn't his. Yes, he was a psychiatrist. Yes, he had that background. But unlike the Freudians, unlike the Jungians, and less so with the Jungians, but Assagioli was really very, very centrally focused on how do I evoke this person's sense of direction, meaning, and purpose.
Yeah, very much looking beyond, really.
Looking beyond, he wouldn't disregard the basement. He wouldn't disregard that, but he'd look at that in the context of what was emerging. Now, I think that's very interesting.